Mae'r Ardaba, John Williams dwi Gadeirydd y Bwrdd Iechyd Prifysgol Bai Abertawe. Croeso cynnes i'r gyfarfod arbennig hwn bore yma. So good morning everyone. I'm John Williams, Chair of the Board of Swansea Bay University Health Board, and a very warm welcome to this special board meeting this morning. Now the board as the governing body has a formal bi-monthly meeting cycle when the agenda includes breadth of the board's role and responsibilities. There are times, however, when the board needs to meet outside that cycle to consider urgent or unforeseen matters. And today is such a time, and the board is meeting to discuss and agree changes that we need to make to our 24-25 financial plan, in line with our responsibilities to oversee and scrutinise delivery of the in-year plans we agree. We are facing significant financial challenges. We are in deficit, and the Welsh Government has put us into targeted intervention, but is the top of one category of its escalation framework when it needs organisations to improve performance. The Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, Jeremy Miles, has made it clear that all health bodies must keep within the target deficit they have or even improve on it by the year end. And for that, for us, it means that we cannot go above a 43.7 million deficit. Now, a review of our current plan indicates that we're going to exceed that sum unless we take additional action in Q4. And that's the purpose of today's board meeting, when the board will need to consider some very tough choices. And we don't do this lightly at all, because we know the impact that decisions will have on staff, on our service users, and on our communities. And we're also mindful that we're doing this at a time of significant operational pressure on the ground. And we hope people will understand that if we didn't have to do this, we wouldn't, but we have to. And also the pressures will continue into 25-26. So we've got a signal, and we must be ready to move seamlessly from the end of 24-25 into the start of 25-26. And we are going to need a radically different approach from the one that we took at the start of 24-25. And we'll say a little bit today about that, how that's going to shape up. But of course, we'll be coming back to this in January and March. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn to our agenda and take our apologies. We've had apologies from Judith Vincent, Andrew Griffiths, Andrew Jarrett, Keith Lloyd, and Jackie Davis. So we have one item on our agenda, but can I just check, does anyone have a declaration of interest in relation to that agenda item, other than declarations already on our register? I've not had any other business raised, as this is a single board item meeting. So we're now going to turn to item 2.1, the financial plan and the Q4 priorities. So Abby, shall I start by asking you to give an introduction before we move over to Darren?
Yes, thank you very much, Jan, and thank you to the board for coming together to enable us to take you through a revised plan that will take us through the last quarter of the year. Colleagues will be aware from previous reporting and the work of the Finance and Performance Committee that we are not where we would want to be at this point in the financial year, despite the significant efforts that people across the organisation are taking. So it does require us to take further action as we go into the next quarter to give us a line of sight to the deficit position 43.7. What Darren will take you through in a moment is a detailed assessment of where we are at the moment and what the challenge is, but also the opportunities that we have to make the improvement that we need to see in the last quarter. It is a stretch because we need to close a 14 million gap and give ourselves a little bit of headroom if we possibly can, so that we are giving ourselves the very best chance and doing everything that we possibly can in the organisation to ensure that we hit that target. I think the organisation, certainly through the management board that we where we meet with the senior leadership team, understands the importance of us achieving this and getting there, and the seriousness of the position that we find ourselves in, and therefore the commitment to work together to ensure that we are taking the necessary action. So as we walk you through the presentation, what you'll see is that there are actions around workforce control, further workforce control, relating to non-core staff costs. Some of that's to do with the activity that we're commissioning through Plan Care. Some of that is to do with the additional capacity that we've got open, and we'll talk you through in a little bit more detail how we think we're going to make progress in terms of addressing those things and the additional mechanism that we're going to put in place to enable us to make further progress in relation to those areas. I think the importance of recognition that we are still too reliant on non-recurrent savings. So I'm really grateful to the work that Darren and the team have been doing with all of the service group areas around where we can make further savings in year. From a non-recurrent point of view, that's going to help us this year. But clearly, as we go into next year, what we really need to be doing is reshaping the workforce, looking at how we can transform our services and have a line of sight to getting to a sustainable position. We have discussed, as we go through the presentation, you will see that we are looking at where are cost drivers in terms of programme budgeting, where we're spending our resources across the organisation, where those challenges are, where we've increased our allocations to recognise either patient safety issues or service challenges. We'll talk you through all of those areas because they're all things that we've got under review at the moment. And then the final thing, John, I think it's worth saying is that it would be really helpful to us to have some external scrutiny of this, to help us understand the drivers, where those opportunities are for a more sustainable improvement of our financial position linked to how we need to transform and improve our services for our population. And that we're working together, and we'll be talking to Welsh Government about how we would commission that support over the next quarter so that it can inform our plan going into next year. So we would need to do that piece of work really rapidly. We started that conversation with Welsh Government, and when we responded to the targeted intervention letter that we had following the meeting before last, we flagged that as something that we were keen to explore with Welsh Government, and are doing so. And I had conversations with our escalation link on that earlier this week, and I know Darren's been following that. We'll be following that conversation up with Welsh Government later this week. We know this is a really hard ask of the organisation and our team colleagues out across the organisation. And we know, as you say, John, this is a time when we are working with heightened pressure around the winter viruses that we're seeing impacting on our demand. So the conversation about how we keep people well at home without bringing them into hospital. We know we're still bringing too many people in on the back of ambulances who really don't need to be with us. And the conversation that we've been having, and I've had in the last week with both local authorities and their chief execs around how do we get people home safely, quickly. Safe at home is where people need to be. And we've got too many people for whom we are causing harm because they're ending up in our system too long. And again, a focused work with both the local authorities, building on the 50-day challenge is going to be important to us as well, so that we can come out of the capacity that is costing us so much in terms of our run rate at the moment. So I'll pause at that point, Jan. Happy to come back as we go through. My suggestion is, Darren, if you run us through the presentation and then we can come back to key points and questions if you're happy with that, Jan.
That's fine, and we'll take Matt's synopsis from performance and finance on Tuesday. Darren, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just check my audio is okay at the bottom of the room. Jean, am I okay across the room? Thank you. Good. So just to echo some of Abby's comments, really grateful for the opportunity to have a board today to discuss these really important matters. And also grateful for the ability to just put a bit of a slide deck across the formal paper which has been submitted and is in the public at the moment. Yeah. There's a bit more in this than is in the paper, but hopefully it strengthens the nature of what the paper is together. Just to remind colleagues in the room that versions of this presentation through the course of the week have been given to the Performance and Finance Committee. Independent members have been briefed, and this was also presented to our management board yesterday. So there is knowledge, traction, and understanding of this across the organisation. This, of course, is the formal part of that today. Make sure that these slides. So what I'll take us through today is just a brief overview of the month-8 financial position, what's driving it and where we are in terms of our savings. And that's really important context to highlight where we're taking actions for the downstream. So we're trying to act against those drivers. And in particular, that relates to not just where we are in this financial year, but relates to our, excuse me, our critical recurrent savings position we need for future years as well. Just to remind us where we are then at month 8, the Health Board underspent in month 8 by 1.9 million. However, that was offset by the fact that we brought in new money from Welsh Government and the letters appended to the report. That means we're 16.9 million off plan at the moment, and I'll show how that gap has been assessed and how we've been moving through that gap in a moment, just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge that we've already seen. I'm going to go through this slide in detail, but board members will be conversant with the detail of this slide, and this just shows you again where the cost drivers of our position are. Our plan work that's set out at the start of the year, the middle section of both of these tables would be zeros, but what we're seeing is pressure in terms of our pay bill, pressures in terms of surge capacity that we have with them, and pressures on some of our non-pay areas as well. We're doing well on savings. We need to do better on savings, and those savings need to be more recurrent as well. And that's mitigating where we are in terms of the push through the system. So that just gives you a real clear sense. We're building narratives through the year and where we can actually make a difference in terms of our spend, which is positive in terms of staffing, patient experience, and the care we deliver. From a variable pay perspective, and we will come back to this later in the presentation, right-hand side table just shows you the level of spend on variable pay. It's just crude spend. That's been between 5 and 6 million recent year. Month 8 was the highest spend month, did have some arrears for bank pay, but we're needing to penetrate the pay bill in a very different way. We need to address the variable pay bill in a very different way. And actually, through recruiting into some of our highly challenged areas, we will have more stable workforce, better working environments, and actually there's a virtuous loop here in terms of how we can modernise our workforce and modernise it. And just from a savings perspective, we've adjusted our savings target to meet the challenge this year. The original plan was to achieve savings of 26.1 million. We are now tracking 59.2 million pounds worth of savings. To date, 52.5 million of that 59.2 has been identified robustly, and 49.5 million of those savings are in this plan and in this position. So we've got 9.7 million to go to achieve all of the savings gap. That's a substantial step forward. This benchmarks well across Wales. The key is that whilst these are landing in this year, the more of this that can be recovered, and it will leave at this point through here, the greater the chance of success and sustainability going forward for the health. And that gap is closing over the time. That was 13.3 million in number, just a number of weeks ago. So just to bring board members to the letter we received recently, so I've highlighted 3 boxes there that are in your packs. This was to set out our share of the 50 million that was allocated on a population share basis across Wales. We've received 6.4 million. That's in the position now. It's adjusted our previous forecast from 50.1 to 43.7, and it's 43.7 or better that we are looking at. The final red box here just highlights that whilst that 6.4 million has been allocated recurrently, our target control total remains 17 million, and we need to work hastily towards that, but sensibly and in a very straightforward and structured way, and beyond that to financial sustainability, which is work we'll do and bring back before the board in the future. I just wanted to set the context of the in-year money and its recurrent nature. And just to remind us of the plan as previously constructed, we set out a deficit of 15.1 million. That was never supported. We've been asked to better it, and that 50.1 million is now reduced by the 6.4 million to 43.7. And those 2 tables just to give you a sense of how that's put together. This is the next chunk of slides then are the meat of the action we're taking and the mitigations we've been able to bring forward to help us move the financial position in the right direction. Whilst this is a busy slide, I just want to draw board members' attentions to the 3 rows across the bottom and what those rows do. The top row, so the revised assessment of month 8 row, shows you where our current projections are taking the financial performance of the organisation at a fixed point in month 8. The second row underneath that sets up the control totals that we have given individual component parts of the organisation to achieve that. And the bottom row, which I will walk across, is where we're varying from that. So you'll see from that bottom row, The Morriston Service Group are 9.9 million away from the Service Group total. We've set them. The Neathcote Health and Singleton Group are only 200,000 away from that. We have assurance that they will get that gap closed. Primary Care and Therapy Services Group are 100,000 away from their target. We have had assurance that they will deliver that control total. Mental health and learning disabilities are 3.4 million away from their target. To be clear, we've asked them to underspend, and we know that's not a sustainable position. It's an in-year position we need to work through. That 3.4 million has moved from 4 million, and there are things that we'll cover later on to pick that up. And then across the Chief Operating Officer budget, particularly around total services, we set the control total, I think, will be 700,000 better than that. And from an estates and finance perspective, my sort of corporate delegation, I was asked to achieve a target of 500,000. I think I can balance this 500,000 better than. Chief Executive has escalated the mental health and LD position and the Morriston position and asked them for further detail of the closure of that gap to be discussed in the first full week of January ahead of the Recovery and Sustainability Board and ahead then of a further briefing to Performance and Finance Committee. So our structure of escalation is working through that. We are clear that if those two areas were close to the target control total, we'd be 12 million. A very different approach into the quarter last quarter. So that just brings that together to show the board. In terms of the approach, and this approach is set at stepwise through the paper, we've worked through 9 individual elements. Some of these have very granular and set numbers. Others reflect further opportunity that we're looking at this pace. And just to talk through each one of those in a very quick way, because I need to get into the detail. We've revised the impact of any corporate contingencies that we can bring against the plan from a financial perspective, effectively the machinery of the corporate I&E. Looked at value and sustainability, which it's a key sort of cornerstone of opportunities that come nationally into the organisation. I'll bring some benchmarking insight. We don't have the answers to the challenge that sets us, but it's a challenge that's well made and helpful, I think. We'll look at the additional savings that have been highlighted through the Recovery and Sustainability Board process. I want to talk about variable pay controls and vacancy freeze. There's less detail on those things in the paper, but since we've discussed this on executive team, this presentation has been updated for some suggestions of a way forward. We need to finesse that and coalesce that to a very clear set of instructions pre-Christmas for implementation in the new year. We have allocated money into the organisation that has been investment, and we've covered off cost pressures. We need to test the delivery of those, whether the benefits have been realised, and I'll put some numbers to that and describe the process. That's a process which is underway, and we will conclude the first wave of that at the end of January. There's a lot more to do there. And then we will look at some of the schemes that we previously considered but discounted in the summer, which just give us a sense of some of the really difficult challenges that we may still further want to bring on top of the difficult challenge we face around the aspects of the care we deliver. And finally, just to be really clear, whilst that's called cessation of activity as point 9, I just want to explain to the board how the money around planned care is working and the decisions we've made around that at this point from a financial and access delivery perspective, which is fundamentally important for us to understand. So this is the breakdown of the corporate contingencies, as we call them, so the things that finance can bring to the party through opportunistic things in here, things we've chased down in terms of VAT recovery, things we've worked on in terms of the way our contracts work with the boards. Originally, that assessment was made at 17.1 million. Our current assessment is that that could be as high as 25 million. A lot of that is one-off, Chair, and it's important to note. But there's a welcome bridging and it comes into the gap that we've got to 14.3 million on the first time. So as I walk through, I'd like you to hold 14.3 million in your head, and then I'll talk about the numbers we can apply against that and I'll bring that together. But there's substantial opportunity. The big numbers on this slide are in green, so we have high assurance on those. There are some numbers on this slide deck which remain zero. Those are the numbers which firm up towards the year end. So I wouldn't want to give confidence in the meeting because we recognise there's an opportunity as well for us. So there's an £8 million benefit to it. There are 2 very detailed slides. Value and Sustainability Board, just picking out clinical variation, continuing healthcare, workforce, medicines, and non-paid procurement. We receive the welcome work of the Value and Sustainability Board, which is chaired by Judith Padgett, the Director General and Chief Executive of NHS Wales, into the Health Board. We process that into our trackers, and the majority of the savings identified are already assessed within the financial assessment of giving. So the benefits are in the 14.3 billion gap. As part of the work we've done very, very hastily recently, we can see that there's potential for further procurement savings to come through the national pipeline of 200,000, and through the work the Recovery and Sustainability team have done with our service groups and linking international perspectives. There are systems within theatres for stock management that we believe could also release £500,000 this year, and impacting on those. There is other detail in here around the way in which we've linked to the national continuing healthcare work. Really interested. The Sustainability Board was yesterday evening. There were other things coming through that around clinical variation that we'll pick up and obviously run through the organisation of that as well. There's no financial assessment of those benefits yet through this. So all I'm giving the board assurance on here is the 700,000 available. There may be more which will feature in Q4. Most likely, particularly on things like clinical variation, some of the pay aspects, those will be 25-26 benefits. But bear in mind that we need to run those last quarter to hit us into next year. There's a couple of slides on benchmarking. Benchmarking, the devil's always in the detail, but when you get numbers of scale, they grab your attention. So the first part of this table, which I wouldn't expect you to read from the screen, basically shows from an inpatient perspective, when you compare the health board to Welsh averages, potentially we're running with length of stays that are higher than others that could release up to 70 beds. There's a direct correlation here to with some of our delayed pathway of care delay patients are impacting our lengths of stay. So there's a really good piece of work here, I think, to be undertaken, which is getting patients to the right place for their care, which will enable us to reduce our surge capacity, manage our variable pay, but more sustainable services around these citizens. When you compare those numbers to our English peer group, because this benchmark allows us to compare with England, potentially with up to 127 beds, and we would have some choices around how we would use that resource when it becomes liberated. Further on this slide deck, we look at day case rates. There are substantial opportunities around being able to do more work as day case. That's more an efficiency and productivity gain here, because it doesn't liberate theatres or beds, but it's actually, it would stop us potentially outsourcing cases further downstream. So there's always virtue in that. And we know we are working on, we have challenges in our new to follow-up ratios. We are also working very hard to modernise those aspects of our service delivery. And the bottom table here shows potentially between 38, 39,000 potential follow-up appointments that could be liberated to grants backlogs, or actually that resource could be redeployed in a very different way creatively. So this benchmarking, which has only come out in the last 3 to 4 weeks, it's out in the organisation, teams are looking at it. The scale is important. That costing return work also gives us a chance to look at how our costs have moved. I'm not going to spend detailed time on this today because I think there's a different type of conversation to be had. But this demonstrates that since 1920, the cost base of the health board in the areas that we cost has grown by 35%. It's not remarkably different to other organisations in Wales, but 1 or 2% on 1.3 billion is big numbers. So we need to use this information. It comes from in a very comparative way. We'll take that and have a look at how we compare them. And what the next slide does, and again, I'm not going to go through this, but takes a programme budgeting approach and looks at the way in which the health board spends resource on things like cancer, blood disorders, skin problems, circulatory problems, they're all there. And how we compare to the way in which that resource is allocated to the other health boards in Wales. And the colours on this just show whether we're spending more or less in those programme budget areas. This is opportunity to understand our service model, whether we're spending money because of our regional status, absolutely spot on, and the proportions are right, or whether we're under providing, and this will help us have a good debate about how we allocate our resource in future years. But also could be something that gives us opportunities into this quarter. So those 3 slides, in terms of granularity, starting with more on the first slide, just show that we're trying to cut the organisation in different ways to make sure that we can mine every opportunity possible in the short, medium and long term, and this is part of that. We also had a very useful discussion at our exec away day last week about how we might want to think about managing obesity and chronic diseases, diabetes, turn the tide up and provide different types of care and prevention for the population. Onto the 4th section now, and this is where the Recovery and Sustainability Board and the fortnightly cadence of that meeting is generating further ideas. You'll see here around 20 individual schemes that have been identified by Mental Health and Learning Disabilities, Neathcote, Talbot, Singleton and Morriston for further development. None of these have a value against them. We've asked for these to be valued by the time we meet in January. Should any of these have a deliverable and assured sum against them, this would be further benefit against the 14.3 million. I've not put the estimates in for the discussion today because I cannot be certain that these numbers will come forward, but there will be an improvement and these will generate some potential savings, either on a one-off basis or recurrently. So it's important to show people. And the recovery and sustainability process is generating this sort of live debate about further savings opportunities. We've had a look at our variable pay bill. I trailed this in the actuals. £5.5 to £6 million spent times 12 is clearly significant. And our pay bill is growing. So our substantive pay bill is growing and our variable pay is 70 million on top of that, or 65% on top of that. The proposal through the work and the analysis is that in Q4, we need to reduce the projected run rate of variable pay by 5.2 million. That's outside of things like waiting list initiative, because the waiting list initiative payments that we make are there specifically to support planned care delivery. And we are, I'll come on to why we made that decision a little bit later on in this presentation. So those are the targets to be set. What independent members and others will not do, just because this work has been sort of contemporary and was being finalised through yesterday, is through my exec team colleagues, particularly through our clinical leaders and through the workforce team, we've been able to start to put together a structure and some thinking around how we will manage a different approach to agency, how we will manage executive level sign-off, and making sure that spend is only by exception rather than by routine. That will need to be sensitive to harm and risk, and we'll make sure that we do that. And this slide and a number of others just start to bring out the thinking on that. Chair, we will hold the board a really clear position on this when we come back in detail, and we'll formulate over the Christmas break what this sort of algorithm looks like in terms of the approval processes to help us manage this. There has been a huge amount of industry and understanding around variable pay developed over the last 8 months. As the board will see and know, we've not seen the change in the actual spend numbers. And these changes and proposals are designed to help us improve that. And I'm grateful to my clinical colleagues in particular for looking at the way in which their professional areas could feature here and the leadership they will take in that area to help manage that in a financial sense and a care delivery sense. And we're also looking at the ways in which we could use bank pay as well. So this is about the variable pay bill. Yes, agency is a good thing to reduce, but also we're looking at whether we can have quick workforce plans through some of the hard to recruit areas where we could actually put a more substantive workforce in place, reduce spend and have all the merits of that sort of approach. And we're also working through the requirements of how we implement a vacancy freeze. We currently have a vacancy panel which looks at administrative and clerical staff. Proposals that we extend that to all staff. And again, this slide describes the design of the process which would support a vacancy freeze across all areas, but clearly have the pressure release valves where we know there's risk and we know we need to make specific exceptional decisions to let us through. So we're really proposing to strengthen the way in which our pay bill is managed into the last quarter. That would be incredibly difficult. These are parts of the tough choices, and we will need to think about how we operationally run services where there are workforce deficits that we need to manage through sharing the burden across the organisation. Coming on to the investment review, we've done a piece of analysis work that looks back over the 23-24 plan and the 24-25 plan. This slide shows that we'd allocated budget through those plans which were signed off to the value of 82.4 million. There's another slide which follows. Some of that money was set against the impact of the decisions we made through COVID. Some of those were around choices in the plan to develop efficiencies and productivity, which haven't been realised, and therefore the cost has remained with the organisation, but the benefits realisation hasn't come through either in serving for financial sense to sustain services. So that's the construct of the 82.4 million. There are 219 individual things that we're working through systematically. And just to cut that in a different way, so the 82.4 million is set out on this slide as well. And you'll see we've put money into cancer services, into continuing healthcare, supporting developing our digital agenda, our urgent emergency care system, and specific run rate pressures that we've had alongside prescribing. Those are the big ticket elements. Some of those areas like prescribing have absolutely happened, and we've seen that spend growth in the organisation. Other aspects, we've probably expected quite a different return on investment and decision that we've not seen. And what the process, which I'll describe on the next slide, will do is start with the urgent emergency care aspect of this, because it's very live. We have summits, we're working through that at the moment, but we'll then systematically work through the other areas to ensure that that money has either delivered what we said it would properly, or we will then make the decision to remove that resource and bring that back in against the bottom line of the organisation. And again, That's very tough to do, but we owe it to ourselves and our financial position in the organisation to do that with good rigour and due diligence. The process for that, so we've started the setup phase. We've allocated people from the savings PLP, traditionally in finance, to the recovery and sustainability team. We've worked alongside with the business case assurance process, so that 8.4 million is live and being tested. They are working through that at the moment, and they're working through the urgent emergency care elements. I've said the 15.6 million within that 82. That will come back in January for decision. We'll take that through internal board governance before that comes to the board chair to make sure there's a recommendation which is firm and clear. And in order for us to get into that, I think we would benefit from further strength in the recovery and sustainability team to look at all of the aspects of this 290 and all the other work that team is doing. And then we will extend that on a step-by-step basis through the 82.4 million, but clearly that first wave of 15 to 16 will be assessed now. We'll come back in January. And then we will build into the process of our business case scrutiny process a better benefits realisation checking, Richie, rather than just allocating the money and then having to go back with a process like this, which is far more difficult to enact and will involve some tough decisions. So the 8th part of the plan, so we're nearly there in terms of the 9 areas I said at the start. I've revisited what we call the red pool, so the board will be very clearly mindful of the fact that in September we had star chamber processes which concluded or identified £38.2 million worth of potential further savings. Within that, we have, and this is the top left table, we've identified 10.6 million, which is on the trackers already. We only said we would do 12.5 million. 2.1 million pool 1, it's 19.2 million in pool 2, and 5.4 million in pool 3, which we have decided not to do. And just to again remind board members, pool 1 are the ones we said we would do. We've since decided, particularly on the mental health schemes, to modify those. Pool 2 were things that would save money but would require further workup because they had implications but would keep live. And pool 3 were things that we decided we wouldn't want to do at that point in time. I've then looked at those because those figures were set up in September. Look at what the value of those schemes would be now if we decided to do them. That's the bottom left table. So that 27 million actually becomes 11.8 in September. And then I've been through those schemes and looked at what could have an impact in Q4 because some of these would take months to work up. What doesn't impact planned care and what would be sensible and practical to explore to implement in Q4. And that identifies £3.018 million worth of things that we could progress. And those 5 areas which make up 3.018 are set out in the table at the bottom and right hand corner. And that was going back through our continuing healthcare position. It links to managed sustainability. There's a discussion with our local authority partners about how we do that together, stepwise in the right way. And there are other aspects then of how we consider our bed base, particularly around pathway of care delayed patients. Now we've cohorted those, and the chief executive already put a really strong and important challenge in on that. How we look at one-to-one nursing and also have some aspects of surge capacity might be able to be modified and planned for, so we can keep that safety in the system, but actually do that for lower cost. So that's what this bottom right hand corner. The final bit before, sorry, it's a typo in the top here, variable costs. The Health Board has received £15.2 million for planned care recovery currently from Welsh Government. We've also, through the regional elements of that, been allocated recovery 18 million for the orthopaedic theatres in Port Talbot, and 1.5 million for regional orthopaedic and endoscopy recovery. We've also bid for and been allocated additional non-recurrent money this year to assist us with the delivery of 104-week maximum weight. We've had 3.7 million for core locally commissioned services. We're waiting to understand where an extra 600,000 might be coming on that because we've asked for slightly more because prices have changed. And we've also been allocated just shy of £1 million for plastic surgery recovery. That's separate because that mechanism comes with the JC. What this financial assessment does is protects that money. That money is aligned to delivering our access targets. And we've been really clear that we will use that to its maximum effect on the basis that should be then, and there are choices here where we could stop, and our understanding is that that allocation would then be taken off us. Therefore, the opportunity here is to maximise the utility of the money to maintain the access achievement target. But there is, I need to advise the board that there could be expenditure we would reduce, whether that would help us on a bottom line basis,
is for debate, and whether that would then make us lose another target is absolutely it would. So that's the construct of the variable pay bit at the moment. We're also not proposing to change any core health board surgical activity either. We're proposing to slow any core. This is all about the build of internal outsourced and other capacity to achieve that. So what does all of that mean? This table brings together everything that I've just talked the board through. It's a £14.3 million gap, which is at the start of this. We can bring 8.1 million through from the financial assessment, 700,000 I described on value sustainability. The variable pay bit needs to be landed, and that would be 5.2 million. And then there's the 3.018 million on the red schemes at the bottom there. That totals just over 16.3 million. So that gives a larger opportunity in the gap, but clearly there's huge challenge in landing, particularly the 5.2 and the 3 in this. And therefore, ideally, I would like a bigger aspect of this. And hopefully, as I've gone through what I've drawn out, is in terms of the additional savings delivery slide, there will be more to come, as yet unquantified. The investment review, there will be more to come. I think that will be a modest we need to work through the practicalities, the benchmarking in particular. So there are other things that could happen that could actually increase the scale of the opportunity. We really must work through the variable pay, the red schemes, as we call them. And the notes on the right-hand side just highlight again that whilst 59.2 was the savings this year that we're striving to get, which is to be delivered, the recurrent nature of those, which could be up to 90 million, is fundamentally important to our delivery for next year as well. And that gives you a sense of the scale of what we've got. There are other risks and opportunities. That's there for completeness. I probably should advise the board that we're assuming an allocation for the wage award of scale. It's 56.7 million. I've not received that yet. We're working very closely with Welsh Government on the nature of how that allocation comes into the organisation. Every other health board is in the same position. This isn't unique, it's just part of your process. If that 56.7 million, which is the 3 and the 53.7, doesn't come in, that's an adverse impact on the plan. So I'm just thinking it's some quite big numbers. So the more we can do to mitigate these risks, be assured on the scale of things that were on the previous slide and deliver those, and continue to work through further opportunities, it's going to be absolutely fundamental to our assurance that this plan to get to 43.7 and start next year well. I've set out here for completeness. I won't go through these because I suspect you'll want to have the debate here, but these are the recommendations from the paper, so I'll put them in the slide deck. And I'll say thank you for your time and patience as I've gone through that quite well.
Thank you, Darren. That was obviously the result of a significant amount of work from the part of you, your team and executive colleagues, and we are really appreciative of that. Abby, shall I ask Pat to come in first with the Performance and Finance Committee summary, and then I'll come back to you. So please,
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, I think just to start by saying that the committee has taken assurance from the establishment of the Recovery and Sustainability Board, the membership of that, the CEO chairing that has been really important. Also in the degree of organisational focus, that the governance, the escalation and the range of activity that's taken place. But we can't underestimate how challenging this is going to be. The kind of sheer scale of the organisational change, the embedding of that change at pace is huge and is of concern. The reporting into Performance and Finance has been open, robust, and we are having additional meetings to make sure we get updates from the RSP. But the areas of concern then, ongoing concern about service group financial positions, as you said, particularly Morriston and mental health learning disabilities, but across the board really, massive run rate pressures and the use of non-recurrent savings to address these in 24-25. So we're concerned about the opening position for 25-26, and it's going to be absolutely critical that the focus is now on recurrent savings in this last quarter. We've been very keen throughout the year on the need to challenge and test base budgets. The use of benchmarking is going to be absolutely critical to that. And we are concerned about the capacity to support that work, especially as well, we've got the investment review and the benchmarking. That's going to take a lot of capacity. So we'd like to see how that's going to be addressed. We have tested the 14.3 million gap. Those are service group figures. They're pretty confident in those figures. There is still some concerns about Morriston's position and whether that will increase. And then we move on to kind of delivering confidence in this range of savings now that Darren has just outlined. In particular, variable pay. We've had limited traction despite kind of focus and work that's gone on through the year, but we've had quite limited impact. So we've been questioning what will be different. It's good to see what's coming through. It's good to see it's an organisational response, not a finance response, to see the kind of the medical director, the nursing director being involved in the changing of processes there. There's a massive opportunity to get this right in the last quarter. Will have a huge impact on 25-26 savings. You know, even what you say now would be £20 million. So it's a critical area. Ongoing concern all year on the level of clinically optimised patients. And the real difficulty in addressing this due to the social care capacity. But we do recognise increasing partnership working, real improvement in how we're working regionally in partnership. And of course, we've got this money now, but it's one-off money for Q4. But that's core, fundamental, I think, to our financial resilience. And then, finally, really looking at the impact of these savings, that ongoing assessment of impact on services and pensions. It's probably the final point that still needs some work to go through.
Thank you, Pat, and thanks to you and the committee members for doing that detailed analysis. Abby, I'll come back to you now before we open up for other comments.
Yeah, thank you. And if I perhaps come to the observations about the medium term first, and then I'll come back to the last quarter position. You're absolutely right. We need to look from a systems perspective how we can deliver within the resources we've got available to us, and we are going to need to step through that. And I think that's where commissioning some sort of external critical friend around that's going to be really helpful to us. So an initial observation, having now been around all of our sites, we are delivering some things on all 3 sites. And when you are then trying to have the most efficient way of doing some of those things, I suspect there'll be some questions. Service groups are already raising questions, exec team are raising questions about how do we have sustainable services across the sites. We know that our sites don't necessarily facilitate kind of flow of patients through in terms of how we're organising ourselves.
It's normal.
Is that normal? Okay. So have it now done? So walking that through around how we're making sure that our assets, both our people and our physical environments, we are using to best effect. So if you look underneath, and I've alluded to it, so we've got theatre capacity, physical that we're not utilising, we've got endoscopy suites, we've got staffing issues. How do we organise ourselves in a slightly different way? And some of the conversations will be, how do we stretch the 7-day working 3-day sessions during the week? All of those kind of things we need to get to through kind of shaping the workforce and looking at how we deliver the activity that we are going to need to deliver in terms of changing demand profile and ageing population, et cetera, because on one hand, demand at the front door may not be going up in terms of numbers. What we know is acuity, some of the patients coming through because of multiple morbidities, those kind of things are impacting. And the way that we treat things like cancers, we are doing some things which much shorten treatment plans in terms of amount of treatment needs to happen, but they're actually become chronic condition management issues because we're doing so much better in terms of enabling people to survive their cancer treatment. But that means that we've got a greater volume of people that we're kind of keeping on our books in terms of providing long-term care. We just need to think about what those pathways look like. The backdrop for me is around equity of access and deprivation and how we work on our population health. So again, working with Matt's team, looking at some of the data that shows our drivers, who is coming in through our front doors, who is coming in through our services. On one hand, there's an anxiety that some people aren't getting to our services in a timely way, and they should be. But equally, we've got patients who are arriving in our system when actually we should be keeping them at home or doing something very different in their local communities. And that's the sort of reshaping that we've got to do. Coming back to this last quarter, I think, Darren, the slide that you gave, which is this is in green. So that's good. That's the highest number is in green. We have got to work really hard on the amber and the red and convert more of that into amber and red. And I think, Pat, you summed it up really well. If we were delivering the savings that we're achieving without the increase in our run rate in terms of what it's costing, we would be in a marvellous position because we are delivering more savings than any other health board, both proportionately and in terms of absolute numbers. But it's our run rate is coming through and the operational pressures are impacting. So we've got to dampen, we've got to increase the savings, but we've got to dampen down what it's costing us to deliver our services day in, day out. And if you look at it down the analysis of where we've increased money, we've increased in the community, we've increased in primary care. We're obviously doing something very different about how we bring our patients through for surgical treatment. But we've got to look at the shape of where we are spending our money going forward. And is that the right shape? We need to change that shape over time. And that doesn't happen by osmosis. That's really careful planning about how we reshape our services. So I think in terms of this quarter, the discipline that we're going to put in around the challenge around the variable pay is we're going to crank that up several gears in terms of the exec team really taking ownership of that and being on top of that. And those who are on calling gold, making sure we don't lose it over the weekends, which quite often happens when you get asked. It's really hard to say no. I know that having been on, we used to do a week at a time in Garden Fell. I know what that's like when the pressure builds up in the week. We have to hold our nerve and we need to give confidence to our teams. And we will have to do things that we know our staff don't like, which is to say, I know you came in on today's shift thinking you're going to be working here, but actually we're going to ask you to work on this ward because we're short there. And some of those sorts of practices that we know our staff find really difficult. But it is better to have staff that know our organisation than an agency worker who comes in, who's not bought into our organisation, doesn't know how we organise ourselves necessarily, and is gone for the next shift and doesn't have the continuity in terms of our patients. So that's what we need to get to, and that's what we need to work really hard with the service groups on over the next few weeks to get traction on that revised process. And as Darren said, I have spoken to both the service group directors, and there's an email to go out to say we need your plans back in. Recovery and sustainable, there's a lot to get through, so we're going to have dedicated meetings before that so we can talk through with those two service groups what they need to do to go further and what as an executive team we need to do to support them and the difficult decisions they need to make, but also make sure we're not double counting anything either in terms of the last table. So we need to make sure they're not making assumptions around some things that we're counting already in a different line. So we will do that in a really systematic way early in the new year. And the conversations I've had with both were they understood the ask, and again I've had a follow-up already this morning with someone coming back going, yeah, we're on it, we're thinking about how we're using our staff differently, which is really encouraging.
Thank you, Abby. Right, I'll open this up for wider questions.
But observation and just for you to come back on, Darren, in terms of considering a freeze on non-essential procurement until the end of March, we considered that. And then I think following on from what Pat has just described, two assurance questions. One is around assurance that there will be robust checks on both equity as well as quality, given the impact that this will have on our population. And then the other assurance question is in terms of overperforming against our contracts, given that health boards are also, there are other health boards out there struggling financially, are we confident that they will have the ability to pay?
It's making this chair package setting.
Okay, well, Abby will pick up the robust checks on equity quality as part of the overall process. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Darren, come back on, will other health boards have the capacity to pay us what they owe?
Absolutely. So everybody's cash strapped. So that there won't be an unlimited resource to meet the need. What we'll have to do is look at how much they want to commission from us, and when they've commissioned or when we've supplied the amount of activity they've commissioned, we don't supply the next one. So the way which the contracts have worked, and then through COVID they were frozen, they're becoming more live now. The reality is that the cost base of a tertiary provider like ourselves has increased. The level of income coming through the LTAs is set nationally, so you get a bit of drift. What we'll do with the support hopefully is to look at what the cost base is, reflect that into the contract, and either we do fewer for the same money,
or we're really clear that when we get to a threshold, we would stop and then have another conversation with the health board about that. It gets complicated when money's allocated for planned care on a provider basis. So when we've got people on the waiting list waiting over 104 weeks for another health board, and then we're allocated money to do that, we will have to do those. So we really must make sure the LTAs are sophisticated enough to catch those things. But it's a well overdue reset that's required across Wales. Those things will be done to us as well, to be perfectly open with board members. But I think in terms of the balance of the transparency of the cost, the volumes commissioned, we do need to be more mature in that space. So it's a good thing to do. It will have other consequences. We'll have to work with board members then. And from a procurement perspective, we've already got controls in place. So we're stopping people with the office furniture things. We've stopped anything that's deemed to be a support service has to come through an executive for approval. We haven't gone further. And should we need to do that, that's something you do very late in the year because it's not a sustainable solution, but you can get one-off benefits from it. So we've already got that escalation in place. I get far more emails from procurement in the last 3 months than I've ever had about, is this okay to go? So that's part of sort of my exec approval of that. But we that will work alongside.
And point around to equity and quality will be built into the protocol when posts come up for consideration, haven't been frozen. Yeah. Other comments, please.
A few observations actually, because I think that summarised the financial aspects that we looked at, and is evident from Darren's report that everybody has total focus on figures and, more importantly, the analysis of the figures that we're working with. I think as much as we're in an exceedingly challenging situation, we have to be mindful of the way people are reacting now to what we have to deliver. So that was my first observation. My second observation is framed around Abby's comment about looking at the shape of what we deliver. And we've all said we have to be benchmarking in almost every aspect of whatever service we're delivering. My concern is that we forget to horizon scan, because if we become so internally focused, we will not be aware of what's coming over the hill. And therefore our plans and procedures and processes will not stand us in good stead to meet the challenges of 25, 26 and 26, 27. And I think in that, the shape of what we deliver, things like you mentioned demographics, the risk we become so focused on that internal change is that we lose the fact that whatever we plan now can be fundamentally changed in the future. But also, I think there's a real opportunity in the marriage between primary and secondary care, and we should be optimizing that marriage as we move forward. So the other observation I make is that when we talk about, and this sounds a very cynical statement, but I think it's important that it's made, when we talk about bringing people in, I'm very nervous that we do that at the cost of losing our active listening of our own staff. So the selection of those individuals that we bring in to give us that external view, that should not be to the detriment of listening to our own people, because they are the people with the answers. So it's just a culture. I think we have to be aware of culture. We also have to be aware that when we're working at pace like this, we can lose focus of the way in which we as leaders demonstrate the cultural values that we have in the organisation. So if there's ever a time at balancing the need to get our figures right, but balancing the need to make sure that our culture is right too, because this is our real opportunity.
Really important points there. I'm
Yeah.
happy to come back.
Yeah, Jean, thank you. Those comments were really helpful. And certainly colleagues in the exec team and probably everyone around the board is going to get fed up with me describing the fact that we need to do present forward and future back. So the conversation we'll be having in the region with Halvar is, what does it look 10 years hence? What is going to be changing? How do we visualize that and work backwards from that? And there will be huge opportunities in there. The digital acceleration we know is going to make a difference to how we can deliver services. We are going to need to think about frailty, obesity, diabetes, multimorbidities in quite a different way in terms of how we support our older people. We bring them into multiple outpatient clinics that are difficult to navigate, with letters coming out all over the place. And we need to think about a different way about how we might support those cohorts of patients going forward. And we had an exec team time out the week before last where we had some really exciting conversations about how we might get into some of that sort of more population health focused approach with some of those services. So we definitely need to make sure as a board we are creating space, yes, with Halvar, yes, with Cardiff and Vale in terms of our tertiary services, because we've got distribution of services across the two tertiary centres that we know will need to change over time. And yes, we need to work in partnership with other organisations. So I had a conversation with one of our clinical directors, Russell Banner, on cancer. And then that evening I was meeting with the Velindre chief exec, going, actually, there's more we can do together in terms of distribution across South Wales, where we've got unequal access for our populations, and let's do something to build on what we've been doing already. So in that regional space, I think there's a real opportunity. You're absolutely right about the culture. The solutions to lots of the issues will come from our frontline teams, because they will tell us we're doing lots of things that aren't very efficient, that don't make sense from a patient flow point of view. And we need to have a way of ensuring that they're engaged, that they're listened to, that they can shape and influence. And that's the architecture we need to put in place. Have a really clear line of accountability, but also so expectation down in terms of the board's strategic objectives down through to everybody's individual kind of personal objectives, but also how we enable teams, individuals to really shape how their services need to improve, using the values that we've got as an organisation. The staff survey results will be really important for us. The key thing we need to know is, do our staff feel listened to? Do they feel engaged? How do we make sure they feel engaged? So that engagement piece coming out of the staff survey is going to be a really critical thing we need to listen to. And I'd be interested to come back to the board in February in the board development, when I do my feedback on the first 90 days, is how can we have conversations with our staff? We've got 15,000 distributed over lots of places, but I'd be really interested in conversation with you all about how we go back in the spring to have conversations with different groups of teams, collectively and individually as we start our work next year.
I've got Helen, Nicola, then Deb. Helen, good morning. Nice to meet you.
So I understand this is a finance special meeting, but it would have been nice to see a paper on impact next to it, on the impact of patients on the public. So we have a rounded situation that we can see. So it would be interesting to have the impact. So everybody knows exactly the finance and the impact on staff and the public and the patients.
Thank you. And we will be bringing that back in detail, Helen, to the January board. But just to assure you, for example, the paper doesn't propose actually moving away from the very good performance we have on plan care, for example, and the board is very keen to protect that. Nuri has made the point about equity being as important as the quality and gender. The two need to run together when we look through all the implications in detail, which the executive team will be doing. Thank you. Nicola, please come in.
Look at the cost of the clinical optimizations. What work are we doing with the local authority?
Do you want to go through the practical? I mean, there's a strategic piece which is around things like pooling budgets, those kind of things, which are crucial to the longer term, because a lot of the standoff with cost is driven by a cost driver. So you discharge from hospital and you move it into social care, and the funding in local authorities is equally as challenged as ours. So there's a strategic piece of work around that we're undertaking, but there's a lot of detailed work on the clinical optimised patients that are are in our beds, that don't need to be in our beds, that would be better assessed and moving through the system, both for the individual and from a cost basis. So do you want to
Yeah, certainly. So
help me with that?
we've got different challenges between the two local authorities. I think it's fair to say, so if we focus, you know, if we look at Swansea in particular, we are looking at how we implement discharge to recover and assess as a process. I think it's fair to say within Swansea Bay, we assess to discharge rather than the other way, which is why patients, we record higher numbers of delays for assessment purposes because we are doing them within the hospital environment. Swansea Local Authority does have an issue with social workers and sickness absence and recruitment, so that adds into that part. So what we're trying to work with them is to minimise the number of patients that we need social workers input for, and do that in a holistic way so that we can maximise the capacity we've got available. Operationally, there's lots of work going on between the teams on the ground to prioritise patients and pull them through. And we are starting to see some of those delays come down. So November, we reported 240 pathway of care delays against 276 in October. So we're seeing some improvement there, but we've got to push it through at pace now to make sure those patients are where they need to be. So we've had additional funding through to try and tackle that going into quarter 4. So it'll be interesting to see, does that open more doors for us or not?
I mean, we had a debate with them on Monday, and you know, the time for assessment is just too long. So I mean, they're talking 10 days for an assessment. We need it in 3 as a minimum. Is my what I'm used to. Some of the best performers are having that in a day. So that assessment resource is crucial because you're assessing to get them out of the organisation to then make the package simpler. So and a lot of that is around domiciliary care, to be honest, and just support at home to be able to get people on their feet. So really it is about looking at the speed of response to some of the requests for then moving, because often we wait for the patient to be medically optimised and then the assessments kind of clock ticks. To probably get some of those parallel processes in place.
Nicola, I'm going to ask if we can have a detailed briefing note on this, how the system works currently in each of the 2 local authorities, because we're going to have to tighten up on processes, aren't we? But it'd be helpful if everybody has the baseline. So Deb and Narissa, can you produce that vision? So I've got Rena, then Deb, then Richard, then Richard. So Rena, please come in.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, obviously a very challenging position and well discussed at Performance and Finance, so I don't need to repeat that. The issue that I particularly am concerned about is, if you like, the assurance in relation to variable pay, because obviously we know from our past track record that we haven't done very well in terms of reaching our targets on variable pay. And we need that reduction, as Darren has illustrated in his presentation, to actually achieve our control total. So what's going to be different in this quarter that we are going to actually be able to, I suppose, take assurance from in terms of reaching that control total? Because we've obviously, it does, you know, reflect on the amount of sickness we've got, the amount of surge capacity we've got, the amount of clinically optimized. So there's a lot of things there that we need to be going at in terms of trying to get this variable pay down. So I'd like to hear what Abby, perhaps, and Darren have to say in terms of what is going to be different, which is going to give us that assurance that it is going to be a different approach in the final quarter of the year.
Thank you, Rena. I'll ask Abby to start and then I'm sure perhaps Abby.
Yeah, and I might come to Richard and Hazel as well. So there are 3 things I would say, Rena. The first is in terms of the sort of short-term decisions we make around someone's not turned up for a shift because they've gone off sick. There is something about the discipline of making sure that we have looked in every other place that we can in terms of redistribution of staffing. So and ensuring that we've got exec sign off of that process and those decisions, because staff need to feel that they are backed and supported if they're making difficult decisions. So we need to own that in the executive space, so that if we are asking them to make difficult decisions, we're going, yep, we are backing you to make that difficult decision. So they need that safety and security that at exec level, we understand the difficult choices we are asking them to make, and we are signing that off and challenging in those conversations. So Richard in terms of the medical and Hazel in terms of the nursing workforce and Chris in terms of the AHP. So that's about giving confidence that we can say no and we understand the risks and the balances that teams are being asked then to undertake and look at that, how we can in totality use our resource differently. There will always be exceptions, and so there's always an opportunity for there to be an exception that the execs will be prepared to sign off. I think in terms of the longer term, we've absolutely got to get on top of our presenteeism, I will phrase it. We need people to be in work, and we need to help people to get back to work, and we need to do that in a way that's compassionate and recognises the challenges of staff. So getting underneath and supporting managers to help their team colleagues come back and be present in work is a really important thing to do. So we need to continue to drive that. In terms of some of the other medium-term costs, again, I've asked Richard to work with the clinical leads on locum costs. We've got a high number of locums. When I was again talking to some of my chief exec colleagues, some have been able to switch. You know, we've had a locum working with us for a couple of years. We're clearly confident in the quality of the work that they're doing for us. I know it might be in their interest to stay on a locum contract, but we really need to encourage their colleagues, if they're committed to working with us, that we get them onto a permanent contract. And we need to really fast track that and find a way with HR colleagues, workforce colleagues, to enable us to really accelerate that programme of work. And if there are exceptions, we need to understand why they are. What is it that's about that particular service area where continuing with a locum might be the right thing to do? And again, there will be specialties where we were just discussing one yesterday, John, working with the Cabinet Secretary, where it's really unfortunate that we've got a pressured service area in cancer where someone's broken both their arms. Not much use to us for the time being. They can come and talk, but they probably can't really do anything with patients. That we'll always have those exceptions. So we're going to make a choice. We either accept we've got less capacity, or we're going to say we're going to, for a very short amount of time, we need to see if we can find a different solution. We do need to first talk to other health boards about, is there something you could do for us in this space? And that cross-regional working, I think, is something that we need to address. So, Rena, your question is, we've got different solutions depending on what the driver for the variable rate is. But I can give you assurance that as an exec team, we are taking direct action ourselves as a team in all of those areas. And in the last quarter, we'll be very hands-on with that. That's not about disempowering people. That's about providing safety and support to our teams, that we are covering them as an executive team for the difficult decisions we are asking them to live with.
Rena, does that answer your question of what will be different? I think particularly for the independent members, is the engagement of the executives.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. It does, Abby. But obviously I suppose in a way, we need to embed that kind of culture, as we've discussed already, across the organisation going forward, because I do feel we need to set the right tone going into 25-26, because we know that we can't be dependent on these recurrent savings going forward. Non-recurrent, savings going forward.
Thank you. And thank you, Rena. And the point a number of people have made around culture change, transformation. There will be a big section in the 25-28 INTP on this, which will underpin the next few years, which will be coming through in the next few months. So that should help with that. Deb, shall I return to you?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a point I want to make from a benchmarking perspective, and particularly looking at a funding element of that rather than the provision. So Abby mentioned the conversation with Velindre. We provide the cancer services and cancer centre for the southwest region. Obviously, Velindre is the provision for the southeast. We absorb that within our health board. Velindre as a standalone organisation. So can we look at the benchmarking on a comparative basis there? And on another side, obviously, we provide a lot of tertiary services, some of which are JCC funded, but some aren't. And I'm not sure that from a funding stream perspective, have we got equity in terms of how we're funding and resourcing those services as well? Because we provide a lot of those, but they are very expensive services. So I think from a benchmarking perspective, if we could build that in as well, that gives us some assurance that we're actually getting the income that we should get as well.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Deb, because I think we all know that the sort of LTA regime that we've got isn't quite where it needs to be in terms of reflecting the cost of services today. And again, you know, just talking to the colleagues in the cancer centre, using the example, that it's much more complex now, and those patients, whilst the immediate treatment might be more costly because it's more high tech, or a different drug regime and requires a different input, we're shortening the amount of active treatment time, but patients will stay with us for a much longer period. And it's that dynamic that doesn't get picked up, and a sense that we're probably not recovering the cost and therefore subsidising. And that's where some of the work on kind of external scrutiny will help us understand that. That's a really important point. Thank you for raising it.
I'll just ask Darren to answer that before we move on. And I've got Richard, and then Chris.
Just to develop Deb's point even further, so we commission probably 80 to 85% of services off ourselves. So when the demand goes up, the cost piles through to us. There's no mechanism because we provide our own commissioner. But whilst the LTAs aren't brilliant, actually, at least when you do the next one for a neighbouring health board, it's a mechanism to recover that. So the previous comment about efficiency and productivity is fundamental to be able to contain that flexibility in-house. Then have those external mechanisms which are live and reflect the cost of service provision. So the benchmarking will do that. But we need to do that in-house as well as for the external relationships. Otherwise, our cost base grows because we're just meeting demand. I think there's a good bit of work in that to do.
Can I just ask about commissioning capacity there? Do we have the right commissioning capacity in-house to do it, building on Pat's point earlier around the whole capacity we have?
It's work to share between Narissa and my team. I think we've got very good contracting capacity.
Yeah, we're good at
But
contract.
whether we've got good commissioning capacity, something we need to perhaps discuss with the executive.
Yeah, brilliant.
Let's pick that up.
Thank you. So Richard T next, please.
Yeah, just reflecting on things, I think it's safe to say that following Darren's presentation, but also all the conversation that we've had, it's very clear that we're doing absolutely everything possible to hit the 43.7 million pounds target, which is really important. And I just want to pick up on a couple of areas. So one was around the clinically optimised patient. So adding to what's already been said around the local authority angle, there's also a patient and family angle as well, where we're doing a lot of work there now in terms of campaigning already, but also doing a lot more work on that campaign around informing individuals around home is best and the risks of deconditioning. And I think that's a really important part of that. And what we've been able to do there is work in terms of informing patients from the moment that they're admitted, talking to them about discharge. And we had a meeting yesterday with Public Health Wales' behavioural science team around that. To see how best we could word things in order to encourage them to come to the right conclusions. And I think that's a really important piece of work. And then picking up on something that Jean said earlier around taking people with us, I think that's really important as well, because as I said, we are throwing everything possible at this in order to hit the targets that we need to hit. And I think obviously we do that through our staff, through our people. And I think how we share that and how we explain that to staff is really important, because some of the things we're talking about are going to have a big impact, and the impact is going to be felt. So I think the way that we communicate that with staff will be really, really important as we move on.
I'm beginning today, Richard, obviously from the board today. Thank you for those really important points there. And Helen, I'm certain that would be of interest and important to clients as well. Thank you. So Richard.
Yeah, I think yes, that's good timing in terms of Richard's comment. I just wanted to build on that really in terms of the clinically optimised patients. I was in a meeting earlier this week where somebody was relating the fact that a couple of patients who were inpatients with us clinically optimised and how distressed they were. They wanted to go home. They were desperate to go home in fact. And so not only is there that issue of deconditioning and the harm that can come from being in hospital for too long, we shouldn't assume either that patients are happy being in until somebody makes a decision to go. People are eager to get home. They want to get back to their normal environment. And so I think in terms of, Helen, your point about quality, that's a really important point to bear in mind, not only in our conversations with patients, only to aware that they want to get out, but our staff in terms of enabling it, the process for assessing outside hospital rather than people bringing people in, and also impressing that on in terms of the conversation that we have with local authorities about the option we've got as alternatives to hospital, because people really don't want to be in with us. And that's a quality issue in itself.
Thank you. I've got Chris, then Steve. Chris.
Similar point to Richard, it was around that deconditioning thing.
people lose 65%, can lose 65% of their functional ability being in hospital an extra week. If we're taking an extra week to assess them, they will need more support at home, and hospital is not a good place to be. So it was around that deconditioning point. Assess to discharge is really essential rather than discharge to assess.
Very important sort of points in our discussions with local authorities, Chris. Thank you. Steve, please come in.
Yeah, thank you. So just on clinically optimized, I understand that one of the reasons that the patients remain in our hospitals is because their homes need to be adapted in order for them to move back into. Now there was, I attended a meeting in my RPB vice chair capacity yesterday actually. We have a problem in West Glamorgan RPB. There's capital money available from Welsh Government, and this meeting was with Welsh Government. There's capital money available, but it's available to build houses, homes, etc. It's not much of it available just to do adaptation. I think 10% of 8 million is allowed for that, but the rest you have to have a proper building. And our policy in West Glamorgan is not to build stuff; it's to adapt people's homes so that they can reside in. And there was quite a strong message that came from us to Welsh Government that we would like that rule to be adapted so that we could spend much more of the capital money on the small scale adaptations, which we get. I understand that of the 48 beds that we have in Gorside, 16 of the people in there currently are waiting for their homes to be adapted. And obviously there's a lag between the money being available and then the adaptation happening. So it's something that from the RPB point of view, the local authorities and the health boards together are working.
Deb, do come back in on that point.
Thank you, Chair. And Steve is absolutely correct. How we can use the capital money within the RPB is really constrained. It's quite prescriptive on where we can go with it. I know we've even had suggestions that actually we use revenue for stuff that we should be using capital for. It's ridiculous. I know, Steve, you came to an agreement yesterday to open up some of that, and we've got to have that conversation. I think within West Glamorgan RPB, we did a lot of the build stuff previously, so that's already done. So we haven't got the same need for the main builds as perhaps other RPBs have. So we're going to continue with that dialogue with them. We have put some additional funding into care and repair and house clearance stuff to try and get some of the movements done. But obviously some of the big ticket items where we have to have home adaptation, particularly for amputees, etc. And they do take a lot longer than anything else. But we have tried to put more into the easier to do stuff, and the equipment store as well is another big one for us, where it seems to be taking more. But if we want to get them out sooner, then those home supports and adaptations are really important. And the more we can tap, we were even looking at sending capital back because we can't spend it because it's so constrained on what we can do with it. It's in the end, we haven't got enough revenue, and then we've been advised to use revenue for what should be capital. There's lots of digital solutions out there, but we can't use capital in the RPB for digital either. It's a bit too restrictive. So the more we can open that, the easier it would be.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Nouri to come back in because Nouri's point will align with Deb's, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I think it's about looking through the third sector, people like care and repair who do the adaptations, but also not just the third sector, but actually the communities themselves are part of that third sector. And there are quite a lot of resources there in terms of people going into people's homes to actually help with really tiny things, like being able to clear up lofts where the energy companies come in and actually insulate their lofts for them so that they can keep their homes warm for the winter period. So there's lots of really creative things that are actually happening that we can tap into. And I think it's that plea to continue to look at those creative solutions. Housing associations, again, key in terms of adapting people's homes. Lots of housing associations doing a fantastic work in Ethan plus Harvard that we can tap into too, alongside care and repair. So I think the plea from my side is continue to look at those alternative solutions and bring in the private sector too, in terms of adaptations to people's homes. There's quite a lot of money on social responsibility that actually can be tapped into improving people's homes that people rarely tap into. So I think that it's about talking to our partners more in that space and being more creative with what we do with the resources. But I do take your point, Deb, you're absolutely right. There is some work to be done in terms of that capital versus revenue.
We did raise in the Cabinet Secretary on Tuesday the need for greater flexibility and common purpose around the RPB. And maybe we can actually write in Abby and I from today with these examples from the board discussion, as well as a specific strand, I think, of the executive team's work, Nuria, on greater use and focus with third sector. I think that would be a really, important point. So Jean, you waited patiently to come in.
Just on that discussion, and it's something Nerissa's probably got in hand already. But I was listening to the radio on the way down, and it was talking about the extra funding into Tata Steel and the increasing numbers of people coming out. There has to be some opportunity with a social conscience for those people coming out, for us maybe to draw down some funding, utilising those staff who are redundant in that kind of way. So that was just an aside. My other point was granular really, but it jogged my memory when we talked about the cancer centre, that last year on a visit, Darren, you recall, we asked about the cost of accommodation, providing accommodation in the cancer centre. And I think we got the response that they hadn't been addressed for quite a number of years, either 5 to 8 years. So I'm just wondering, and this is every penny counts again, have we looked at the recosting of that accommodation provision?
Take that away, Gemma, plus the deep. We'll certainly have a look at it.
So was there anything you would come?
On Tata, so I'm about to go to Tata. So we have a business case that we've put in. It's more around sort of emotional well-being, but it is targeted to the third sector. So we've put it's a big, extensive business case. It's about £2 million. So and we're linked into the employment processes around that as well, so that we're trying to, there's big matching exercise. A lot of the money that's come down from UK government has gone into employment and matching people up and reskilling and rebuilding changes to skills base for the population. So a big chunk of it has gone on that, but we have a business case of about £2 million in to support some of the third sector organisations to do just some of that stuff really. So and that is moving forward. So I think the response to Tata has been very strong. So and there's quite significant funding come down nationally.
I just think there's an opportunity to optimise people who want to set up their own business.
Yeah.
And
there's quite a bit of support around that. So Department of Work and Pensions have been working quite extensively to try and match people to develop the skills base. So most of the money has gone in re-employing and helping people to get into businesses, rather than kind of creating a response to the problem, if you see what I mean. So so that's essentially been the process involved.
And Jean, just for completeness on that, we are engaged at working group level below the transition board. We weren't successful in an application to get on the transition board. So Steve and I have been working on this, and we're about to make another application to the transition board chair, Joe Stevens, the Secretary of State, to try and get ourselves on that. And Steve has been in discussions with Eastwood Hall, particularly around that, because the points we're making, and we know the Cabinet Secretary for Health is really interested in this, because the scope is broadening, the number of people being caught up in it is broadening. So we just need to be in there in terms of what we can offer, but then how we can use resources. So a really important point there. Thank you. So do we have, Jen, please come in.
Just coming back on that, two other elements that link directly to that. One is that we have been successful in being able to secure some resource for us to lead on the commissioning of a comprehensive health impact assessment, which will pick up therefore on not only recognising the immediate impact which we're seeing at the moment, but that ripple effect which we know is going to happen, which goes beyond the supply chain but into our communities and so on. And the other element as well that we're actively working on is we're baselining ourselves as an anchor institution, and within that will cover elements around how we allocate spend internally, how we think about where we're spending our money in terms of external contracting and procurement, as well as employment and various other elements. So that will take us into the arena where we can actually be bringing back then through due process internally about what is our appetite in terms of what's our vision and what do we really want to achieve in the longer term, because I think we do have those choices, but they're not necessarily always the easiest choices. They come with some caveats and some challenges. But I think there's an appetite across the organisation to get into that conversation. But that's a piece of work that is already ongoing, and it will come to fruition and come back through due process for us to be able to take a view on.
And well done in securing that money for the commissioning. Yeah, good submission. Well done, Jen. Okay, so do we have any more points that we want to bring out? Right, try and summarise this then. And thanks to everyone for what has been a really detailed, informative and informed conversation. And I'm sure will help the executives significantly as sort of taking the next step. So in the paper, there are a number of things we're asked to do, and I'm going to suggest there are some things we actually need to approve as the board rather than agreeing to them. But there are a number of things we're asked to acknowledge first of all, which is really about acknowledging the fact that we understand the scale of the challenge that we're in. There are a number of things that are set out there, and of course, as Darren said at the beginning, just remember the number, 14.3 million. And that, you know, we need plans in excess of that to increase the confidence around getting to 43.7. Darren has taken us through improvement in the corporate contingencies identified there and set out for us the risks and further opportunities not currently on the plan. And Darren has indicated the possible scale of these in Q4 and beyond. We acknowledge the work involved in the 82 million of investments over the last 2 years to be reviewed. And then as a consequence of everything we've been taken through, there's a total of 16.3 million worth of options presented, all of which require urgent progress. And of course, Darren has also reminded us and advised us there's no further contingency available to mitigate anything else that comes into the frame in Q4. So we intend to acknowledge, we understand the situation that we're in, the seriousness of our financial position, and therefore the need for the additional changes to our in-year plan. So then we do have some things that we've agreed and welcomed, in fact, that, you know, the Recovery and Sustainability Board is going to work through all the Value and Sustainability Board opportunities nationally as applied locally. We welcome particularly all the additional data we now have on CHKS and programme budgeting, because we've all raised the issues around the fact that a number of the comments that come back from service groups relate to baseline underfunding. So the actual real analysis of costs against benchmarking will be really important. And then we do agree, as you've taken us through, Darren, there are further savings identified, and they will be routed through the Recovery and Sustainability Board, who very strongly result from performance and finance meetings. So then I think we come to things that we actually need to approve rather than agree. So we do need to approve the requirement for an immediate development of an action plan, particularly around the variable pay requirements, as we set up, given that is one of our really big pieces of work to land, not just for the rest of this year, but then into 25-26 onwards. And we need to approve as a board a vacancy freeze for all posts to be overseen by a revised vacancy panel with a very clear protocol that perhaps we can ask for sight of when that is determined, to make sure that we don't impact adversely, as Helen's highlighted and as Nuria has highlighted, on equity and quality. That would be a really important point there, but it's for the board to approve the vacancy freeze. And then we do approve that we can't use the plan care money for anything other than a purpose directly allocated to us, or we will lose it. Yeah, so, and there's no point in us stopping the activity. It is, as the Cabinet Secretary's told me, a non-negotiable imperative. So there's no point in actually saying to Welsh Government, we're going to row back on that. And in fact, at the meeting on Tuesday, our planned care performance was the thing we were singled out for as being better than any other health. So that's one positive for us. And then we also need to approve immediate development of plans to release the benefits, further options, as Darren is taking us through, 3.018 million, again, to be overseen by the Recovery and Sustainability Board. So we need to approve these matters. Also, we need to determine assurances we can take. And I think we can take assurance that there is now a forensic organisational focus, that we have the data, we're applying it objectively and rigorously, and we do take assurance that the Recovery and Sustainability Board mechanism is now there, chaired by the Chief Executive, with a very clear programme of work, both for the remainder of quarter 3, quarter 4, and then into 2026. But also, we really have to acknowledge the challenges and the risks, the scale and the pace of the changes that we are required to bring in, the capacity that we have to do this. And that's partly why we need to build in some external support, not forgetting that in doing so, we must always give primacy to listening to our own staff. The challenge around impact and equity has been well made, and that has to be taken into account, as does primacy around safety. Patient safety has to drive everything that we do, and there are a number of risks inherent in this whole thing. There's a huge cultural change, transformation program required, so we cannot underestimate the impact of that, as I've said, and the point that Richard's made about communication, not just to our staff, but out to our broader community and population as well, starting from today. There will be a number of strands to the work of the Recovery and Sustainability Board. Now, we've added one around the sector, for example, and those will be minuted as well. We've got a particular challenge around our partnership working with local government. We think there's movement. We need to accelerate that movement and really engage with them. And we have specific briefings and specific pieces of work for Abby and I with the leader and chief execs of the two local authorities in that respect. Now, what have I left?
Sorry. John, can I just talk about the communication? So I'm really conscious that next week we're in the festive week, and yet we're giving out quite a difficult message from the board today. So thanks to Richard's team, he's going to coordinate a midweek message. Is not midweek, it's Thursday, and it will be around the conversation we've had at the board today and on what the ask is and the impact in the organisation, followed by something that's a little bit more cheery next week in terms of going into the final festive week, to reflect the fact that it is really difficult out there, and we're asking a lot of our staff as we go through the next period.
Thank you. And we can sort of reiterate that on behalf of the full board, really. We do understand just how tough it is. And as I said at the beginning, we have to do this. Otherwise, we certainly wouldn't be doing it as in the run-up to Christmas, and we wouldn't have to be as radical as we need to be to get to that 43.7 million. It's a hard ask, but I just think we put a lot of really hard work in now, or we will during quarter 4, which will set us up for 25-26. And let's remember, in terms of acknowledging the scale of recurrent savings we're actually making. And that is a very big, plus and a very positive indication the organisation is coming along with the need for this fundamental change. So we should acknowledge the scale of recurrent savings as well, recognising we need to move further. Okay. I think I've covered everything. Okay. Well, Mae cyfarfod ar ben nawr, diolch yn fawr i chi gyd am eich cyfraniadau. So that's the end of the meeting and thank you all very much for your contributions. As I've said, a very rich, informative and informed conversation. We'll be back to this at the January board and Performance and Finance Committee will be back to it on our behalf. Not with, we extend our thanks again to committee members. Rena, was there anything you think I've left out?
No, nope, Chair. I think you summarised it very well.
Okay, so I'll close the meeting now then, thanking everyone again and sending yet another message out to our staff to say we just appreciate everything everyone's doing day in, day out. And we know how tough an ask this is. We do understand that. Thank you. We'll have a short break now and then we'll go into board. Thank you.